I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. I first met my guest today when we did an online workshop for the Arts Lab in October of 2020, so that's nearly 3 years ago. It was a practical exploration of stream of consciousness writing, and the workshop was called "Telling the Stories We Were Always Told to Keep Secret." And we were encouraged to sort of delve into our memory to write about things that have a hold over us, maybe things we were ashamed of, afraid of, or whatever the hold might be. This whole workshop, I had a really profound effect on me, and I have to say it took my interest in the importance of mindset to a kind of like a sort of higher level. This is but one string to my guest's wide-reaching bow. She's a multidisciplinary artist, teacher, writer, speaker, visual and sound artist. I'm sure there's plenty more things as well. She was also a pivotal member of, and it doesn't get more mind-blowingly seminal than this, of Psychic TV for 10 years. Being married to Jen from 1981 to around 92 before they separated. I mean, I only know a fraction of her life story, and even that is incredible. If you follow her Facebook page, you'll have noticed more stories, photos, and memories of her life starting to emerge. And this, again, sort of makes me think back to that writing class that we did. So I'm really excited to talk to her about what's brought this on, more broadly about how she's navigated her way through the good and the bad times and how she's evolved as a person. So, Alaura O'Dell, what can I say apart from it's wonderful to see you again after 3 years. Wow.
I can't believe it's been 3 years.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
It's crazy. I was thinking, oh, was that like a year ago?
I know.
3 years ago. I loved doing that workshop. I really did. And yeah, I mean, I did. It's interesting. I've been doing more interviews recently because, like you said, sort of social media. It was only about within the last 3 months. I was having a conversation with a friend. Actually, he sent me an email. And in the email, he said, I see you very much living in the present and not the past. And I also see you as thriving. And then, I sort of digested what he was saying. And I thought, yeah, I do live in the present and not the past. And also, what is my past? Like you were saying about the writing workshop.
Yeah.
So basically, when I left Jen and subsequently left Psychic TV, well, more I sort of really got kicked out of Psychic TV when I left Jen, but that's a whole other story. Then I think there was actually so much trauma involved. And also because we just had, not long before, had Scotland Yard raid our houses in Hackney, where I grew up, and also in Brighton, that I didn't realize until quite recently that I just really shut the door on that part of my life. And I also didn't realize that I had all this PTSD connected to the trauma, of my marriage falling apart and that raid on the house, and also losing my career overnight. It's sort of, that was my whole life, apart from, of course, my children. It was, from when I woke up in the morning to when I went to sleep, when I woke up in the middle of the night, thinking about, oh yeah, we have this tour coming up and I've got to plan this, because I was tour managing at the very beginning. But it's huge to lose all those things overnight, like your relationship, even though that was my choice, and your career. So So it felt, this light bulb went off like, oh, it's time after 31 years to talk about my life and my creative contribution to psychic TV, and the offshoots of that, the Temple of Psychic Youth, and also my intro into psychic TV, which was being invited to play with 23 Skidoo.
Yeah.
And I just did a couple of gigs with them, but it was like, oh, I'm suddenly performing in front of people.
Mm.
It's been a journey. And I also think I realized there was something about, it's been 3 years since Jen transitioned, passed away.
Yeah.
And it almost felt like, oh, I don't have this pretty big shadow. He was a big personality.
Yeah.
And I also realized, to be honest, that if I had spoken about my life in psychic TV while Jen was still alive, still on the planet, um, I think I wouldn't, I would have spoken my truth, but there would have been attempts to silence me. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, just like my work, the writing workshop, like, oh, it's time for me to tell the stories that I was told to keep secret.
It's interesting that it's really interesting. I get on so many levels. Sort of first of all, the catalyst. You know, getting the email or from your friend, and what what perhaps seems like I'm not going to sort of say it as an innocuous email, but something within that sort of triggers you to do that. But and then also then these characters, that do have a hold on us, larger than life personalities, this feeling of I'm not being myself. I've had that as well, obviously in very different ways, but the principle of identity and sort of personalities coming out is really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I'm reading this book right now that my sister gave me 20 years ago, and I delved into it a little and then got distracted and started reading, hundreds of other books.
Yeah.
But yes, and I've come back to it, and the title is Yoga and the Quest for the True Self. So I think that's such a big question. What is the true self? What is
Mm,
our true, authentic self? Because we all wear these masks to sort of be in public, go into the world. If you're actually in the public eye, then there's this big, for a lot of people, it's, you put on this mask that people don't know. It's like that saying, you don't know what goes on behind closed
yeah.
doors.
Mm,
And um, yeah, so I think I've just had a lot of time to unpack all of this. And in that time that I initially left psychic TV, but onwards, it was, my whole identity really was being in psychic TV and then being married to Jen.
yeah.
And it was like, oh, I need to find out who I am, like what's my authentic self, which I'm still, I think that's a lifelong journey. I'm still
Yeah.
sort of unpacking that. But
Yeah.
I took a sabbatical for a while. My lifelong dream was to go to college and get my bachelor's.
Mm,
But in the interim, I started a company, Sacred Journeys for Women. So I was very interested, I've been very interested for decades in sacred sites.
yeah.
And I would take these vacations to holidays to sacred sites around Britain and Cornwall, stone circles, etc. So with my company, Sacred Journeys for Women, I brought women around the world back to Britain and to sacred sites and
Mm.
kept, delving into that and my own research. And then finally got to go to college when I was 50, and I did an intensive program where you get your bachelor's in a year. But I had done 5, 6 years at the community college,
Yeah.
getting all my prerequisites. And then when I graduated, I went straight into a master's program, creative writing and consciousness.
That's
So I've
incredible.
had a lot of time to unpack. And my bachelor's, basically, when people say, what was your bachelor's in? The official title was interdisciplinary studies. So again, it was like, you can delve into many areas, but the main theme of that bachelor's was unpacking white privilege. So it was
Yeah.
really, really intense, but really good,
Yeah.
um, with a sort of minor in social justice. So that's the long answer to some of the things that I've been doing in these last 30 odd years, from leaving psychic TV until now, yeah, 30 years later. It's kind of crazy.
Do you think?
And
Sorry, go on. No, go on,
oh,
Laura. I
oh,
was just going.
sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, leaving Jen, but also getting kicked out of England. So
Yeah.
it's like, thank you, Scotland Yard, because really I have to thank them for, like a lot of opportunities came from that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Just before, I got an email. There's a publication I follow called the Big Think, and one of the articles was about personality changes and how for years and years and years, literally up until last year, scientists' thinking was that personalities don't change. So and there are kind of five. Well, I say they didn't think that they've done a big global study, a sort of long term study over many years, and they published this report last year which says that people's personalities do change, and it's things that they mentioned in 5 ways. There's conscientiousness, curiosity. I didn't have time to, and I can't remember the other three, but it's things like that. And then there were several sort of events, kind of major events. So, getting your first job, divorce, remarriage, those sort of big events are the ones that can influence um, these big personality, these kind of key personality changes. I just thought it was really interesting because if I think back to when I was younger, and it's really only for me personally in the last, I would say, 8, 9 years, where I started to get rumblings that something was not right, that there were things that sort of needed to change. Up until then, I think what I'd learned from my parents was that, this is who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see that article because, we're that saying is so popular of a leopard doesn't change its spots,
Yeah.
that people don't change. And I've even heard a therapist say, oh, people don't change.
Mm,
um but I think there's enough examples out there of people changing. I mean,
mm,
some, actually Gandhi just came to mind, of like someone who, in some ways is working in the system, being a lawyer, and sort of conforming on having a job and, wearing a
yeah.
suit and all these other things. And then, stepping into seeing what was happening in India,
Mm,
with the English, and and seeing how, I mean, I feel that he was, he had an interest in social change and peace and activism before that, but fully stepped into that role, even
mm,
by dropping the clothes of a normal life, let's say, whatever normal is. My therapist said the only thing that's normal is the setting on the washing machine. Which is like, it's so true. People are like, what is normal? What is normal? But it's like, you can count on that. You've got a normal setting on the washing machine. So I'm like, okay, let's do the normal today. Um, um, but yeah, I mean, people do change. I mean, like addicts are a great example. I mean, I think we're all addicts, it's
Mm,
either whatever it is, you're if you're not addicted to alcohol or drugs, we've got the sugar thing going on, we've got the
yeah.
shopping thing going on. But people get into 12-step programs and people become
Mm,
sober,
mm.
and they change, and you have to change. So I'd love to see that article
Yeah,
because
I'll send that to you.
yeah, yeah,
It's interesting because I think if I'm not mistaken, the Buddhism has a principle of ever changing identity. I think I'm right in saying that. So it's almost like that it's accepted in that in that world really that people do change. Your identity is something that is supposed to evolve, which I think is right. I agree with that.
yeah. I haven't heard that specifically from Buddhism. I mean, I'm sure it's there. I don't have that knowledge, but
Yeah.
Buddhism, I know that so much is the emphasis of impermanence.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so that,
Exactly.
yeah, that would be the thread of change, that everything is always changing. And
Mm,
I love with the Tibetan Buddhist sand paintings, and they create these beautiful pieces of art over days, sometimes
yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, don't don't blow it all away. Don't sweep it all away at the end of the ceremony. But
Yeah.
it's such a huge lesson in
Yeah.
impermanence that you can create this beauty, but if you sweep it away, it's like our imagination should be able to keep the beauty there. It
Yeah.
just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about well, in fact, probably sort of more towards the start about living in the present and I'm interested in the role that the past plays in how for you how that informs who you've become now. I mean, obviously that again is a lot to sort of pack in, but I'm
The
just sort
pack
of
in.
interested because the past is interesting and sort of this sort of thing of nostalgia and how it gets perhaps distorted. So I'm interested how what sort of role it
Yeah.
plays for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think it's the balance, isn't it, of how do we reflect on the past? And
Mm,
obviously, we're going to have some nostalgia from the past that we go, oh my God, when my grandparents were alive, we had these wonderful Christmases. And actually, we did. I had these wonderful Christmases at my grandmother's house.
yeah.
And I think, my kids are like, Mom, oh my God, my youngest daughter's like, you're so into Christmas, like stop buying a Christmas decorations. And I was like, where does this come from? Like, why am I so like obsessed with Christmas? And it's like, oh, I'm really more pagan, but I take all the pagan elements of Christmas, that
Mm,
they have, yeah, the red balls and the gold balls were symbolic of the
yeah.
gold bringing in this, bringing back the sun. And then the red actually is symbolizing blood, where you
Mm,
can go out, and hunt the food. And then the white with the snow, etc. But I think we can have a healthy perspective of looking back nostalgically, um, and reflecting and feeling the good memories, and also obviously there's the bad things that happen,
mm,
but extracting, um, even with the bad things, what's the positive in terms of learning? We have to, if we're stuck in the past, I think we just don't grow.
yeah.
And I was thinking that this morning of that respected elders. Actually,
Mm,
this Catholic nun who was running the Sisters of Kildare, who keep the light of Bridget alive in Kildare in Ireland.
yeah.
I remember we were there and we would do these circles when I took the women's groups, and we would be in circle holding hands, and she would say, it's like the past, we can't change the past, and we can't predict the future.
Yeah.
So I ran into a neighbor the other day, and I said to him, hi, how are you? And he's like, good. How are you? And I said, I'm good. I said, as long as I stay in the present moment, I'm fine. If I start thinking about what's going to happen in the future,
Yeah.
am I
Yeah.
going to as a bag lady? Am I going to, is the, World War III going to happen and all those things? Then you can spin out. But if I remember saying to someone I know once, how are you? And she said, right now, in this present moment, I'm good.
Mm,
So so I think we've got to, like, don't dismiss the past and all the things that have happened, even the hard things. But what are the lessons and the growth that you can gather
mm,
from the past? And what can you bring into the right now, present? And then as the future happens, using those skills and your experience from the past to deal with the present moment. Like before we went on air, we were talking about, you said to me, how are you? And I was like, I'm good, I'm alive. But also, like, and it's true, what's the alternative?
yeah.
And but also that you mentioned the person that you interviewed, of like when she said, um, when you're 65, like you don't care anymore. And I said, well, I've just turned 60, and
Mm,
I'm getting there of like, yeah, of course I don't want to be rude to people, but sometimes I feel like at my age, you realize time is running out.
mm,
If someone invites me to a party and I'm like, I don't know anyone at this party, or I'm invited here or there, or I was having a conversation with people today that I don't really know. We just sat down at a table after the service at my spiritual center, very nice people, but I just thought, okay, they've never heard of Burning Man, um,
yeah. Yeah.
and I don't really have anything in common with these people, but they're very nice. I don't have the time to continue. I'm like, I gotta go, I've got an interview, bye.
I gotta go. Yeah. It's
Gotta
interesting.
go.
It's really interesting. I mean, I spent a lot of my life. Um, I mean, when I was a kid, I was very shy. Um, there were I'm an only child. There were sort of situations that I felt uncomfortable being in, mainly when there were other people around. On the positive side, I got to get very comfortable in my own company. And I've always been totally happy with that. But I spent a lot of my life pleasing people, and it's I mean I'm 55 now, and it's when I was saying about I felt my sort of identity shifts happening. That's when I started to think, do you know what? I'm kind of starting to get done with this pleasing people all the time, even though it's kind of part of my nature, and so, but to the extent that it was taking over, I thought it's kind of time to end this, stop doing
Yeah,
it so much.
yeah. No, that's great to hear. I mean, also before we went on air, we was talking a bit about that, and I was saying, I think especially for women, we've been taught, like we have to be nice. We've got to be the
Yeah.
nice girl. I just saw the Barbie movie, which I resisted,
Mm,
but people were saying, "Oh, it's great," and I went with my girlfriends, and
mm,
it's so good about unpacking patriarchy. And
mm,
even if we're, hip and aware, and we think we're hip and aware, there is so much to patriarchy. And
yeah.
I think for women, it's like, girls, young girls, like you're taught, and what's that? There was a little girl. My grandmother used to always say that there was a little girl who had a little curl right in
Yeah,
the middle
yeah,
of her forehead. When she was good, she
yeah.
was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid. But I think I was really raised, I was an only child till I was 8. So I
Mm,
was also, used to being on my own. I had cousins who would come over to my grandmother's house where I lived for a while. Um, but I was also very, very shy,
yeah,
really shy. And people, even now, I say to people, I'm an introvert, and they're like, "You're not."
yeah, yeah.
And I like,
I know what you mean.
yeah, it's like I do my extrovert when I'm out the house, even on stage. I had our lovely roadies, especially Richard Dawes, who's just amazing, but push my equipment, when I was DJing to creating soundscapes to the side of the stage. And so I didn't have to face the audience, like going on in front of something like 60,000 people at Reading Festival.
Yeah,
You know, it's like a bit overwhelming.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, it really, I mean, actually, in a way, the bigger the audience is, it makes it more surreal than, you're doing a gig in bumfuck nowhere. I don't know if you can swear.
Yeah,
I think I swear.
you
I
can.
think I think
You
you
can.
and Mal were swearing on the interview we had.
Yes, you can. You
Mal.
can. You
Yeah,
can say what you want.
yeah, I think there was a lot of four-letter words in that interview with wonderful Mal. I adore. I always had a crush on him, and I never told him what I was. He used to come to Beck Road with Richard, and I think I would just sit there going, "Oh my god,
Smell. Oh, he's great. He's really great, isn't he?
he's such a great person." Um, but now I've got distracted. But yeah, like the whole thing about being nice. That's one thing I admire about my youngest daughter, Genese, who is 38 now, but
Mm,
she's much more like her dad, and
yeah,
Jen, if he didn't like you, you just knew it immediately, like he would say something.
yeah.
But Jess can be like that. I think it's this quality that I admire,
Mm,
that she won't pretend that she likes you. If she, it's like what you see is what you get.
yeah,
And I admire that because I'm learning that. I'm still learning that, but I'm much better at, yeah, if someone pisses me off, just like
yeah.
you've pissed me off. Like I'll give you a couple of chances, and then it's like no. So I think like I mentioned to you, a friend was just saying, women have to stop apologizing. And I
Mm,
think but especially, if you're English, British, and you're from a certain generation, we were really raised on that please and thank you, but also
yeah,
seen and not heard.
yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so how are you? I really admire these musicians and artists who do seem like they're or just completely authentic. I mean, who comes to mind? Like Tracy Emmons
Mm,
and Patti Smith.
yeah,
Like Patti Smith, she's not buying into the cosmetic surgery or dyeing her hair, or it's like what you see is what you get. And I have a
mm.
huge admiration for people like that.
So with that, your personality and your your childhood, how and what you learned, what you were sort of brought up with, how did that then sort of evolve over the years, from getting into 23 Skidoo through to Psychic TV and later?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just so much to think about and
Mm,
unpack and use that word because a lot. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I grew up in the East End of London, and actually wasn't born in the East End of London. So
Mm,
I was born in Westminster. My mom fell over in the snow, but she was from West London in Fulham, working class family.
yeah.
And then she got together with my stepdad and moved to Hackney, and we moved into a house that was condemned as a slum. Um, So I went from sort of living in West London and, my grandparents were nice. They weren't wealthy. They were working class, very hardworking, but a comfortable home.
Mm,
And then to this house that had no bathroom and an outside toilet. Um, so I think it was just, I mean, I was literally thrown in the deep end, but I had that experience of like street smart,
yeah,
so have a lot of street smarts, I think, about me. And then, and then, down our street was very mixed culturally. We had African families, West Indian, Irish families. My family's part Irish. Um, so culturally, that was very rich.
yeah,
Um, I was also, so because of that, I was immersed in great music, exposed to some amazing music
yeah.
and a lot of Caribbean culture, where I actually went to the Caribbean when I was 16 on a volunteer trip and
Mm,
was going to dance halls. And my boyfriend when I was 13 was a DJ, so I got exposed to like soul and R&B and
mm,
Stevie Wonder. And then I met Jen and got exposed to all this other music that I didn't know about, like
yeah,
Nick Drake and Sid Barrett. So I'm trying to think what your initial question was, but it's just sort of, the influences and sort of
yeah,
me. I think it's like the question you said about earlier of looking into your past, that I think I look into my past like, oh, this it's like a book, all these chapters,
yeah,
sort of 0 to 6, I was living in West London, Hammersmith and Fulham. 6 to 18, no, 6 to 27 or 28, I was living in Hackney. And from 18, I was living with Jen.
yeah,
And met people like Mal and Richard of the Cabs, and
mm,
um, William Burroughs, Kathy Acker. But I never met these people thinking, oh, wow, they're famous.
mm,
Like, oh, Cabaret and Voltaire are like famous, or Throbbing Gristle are famous. I'm just like, oh, yeah, there's these people from Sheffield who are coming. I better, make sure we've got enough biscuits in, for tea. And what am I going to make for dinner? All that stuff, which I think is a great advantage. When I met like Timothy Leary, it was just like, oh yeah, weren't you that guy who did the turn on, tune in, rub out thing? But yeah, but sometimes even now I kind of walk along. I do this morning meditation most mornings in the country park where I
mm,
walk my dog and sometimes run, but and meditate. And sometimes I really have to pinch myself, and I'm like,
yeah.
wow, I'm this girl that grew up in Hackney, and I am living in Northern California.
It's really weird because like I remember when I was a kid and this is like being an only child. My parents had quite an influence on me, and I often felt like the spotlight was on me, which possibly sort of explains the people pleaser side of me. But then I mean, musically, I was classically trained. So I played the cello when I was a kid until I was about 17 and, did all my grades and things like that. And there was a part of me that I felt like I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And, then I got into punk music, but when I was, well, kind of like when I was 12. So I had a period of a good few years where there was this tension because I couldn't see the sort of the classical music and the punk music just ever sort of coming together. So, but it was hard to shake off those influences. And when I got into other environments, like when I went to college, to you're mixing with other people, and then to shake off what I'd grown up with and or been taught was quite tricky. I found.
Yeah. Oh,
So
um,
I'm wondering for you, you know, with your sort of childhood, then going into this world of music, how that transition happened, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does make sense. Well, first of all, I want to say that's so wonderful that you were classically, trained. I wasn't classically trained, and I've been learning the Celtic harp, and it's just like,
Ah,
oh
wow,
God,
wow,
but I love it. I'm taking a little break, sabbatical from that, and I need to
yeah,
get back. But well, I think there was, I think some things probably when I look back sort of helped me where I didn't grow up with parents who were traditional in terms of neither of my parents really had. I think my mom had a 9 to 5 job for a little while.
mm,
Um, and then my dad was up to all kinds of skullduggery.
mm.
So it wasn't like my parents could be like, oh, no, 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 you have to get a 9 to 5 job. And
Yeah, yeah,
because I
yeah,
be like, hey, you don't have a 9 to 5 job. And so I had that. And with my grandmother, I remember once I took the whole band to her house and she'd retired to Sussex, not Peacehaven along the coast from Brighton. So I take the whole band and we looked kind of post-punky and everything.
mm,
And she didn't bat an eyelid. And my grandmother, it was, I could get tattoos and, have my piercings. She didn't know all about where all those piercings were, but,
yeah,
dress weird and whatever. And she didn't bat an eyelid about that, but she was very upset I was vegetarian at the time because it was just sort of
uh,
like, growing up in the war, that meat and
yeah,
veg. Um, so I think, yeah, and I just, before Jen and I got together, the last 2 years of school in my sixth form college, lower six, upper six, that I had a group of friends who were very alternative, I would say.
yeah,
So
yeah,
punky, and they were off going to see David Bowie, and I was going off to see Sylvester when I was 11, on my own or with a
yeah,
friend, not with a parent. And we were going down almost every weekend to see the Rocky Horror Show.
mm,
My dad actually lived on King's Road for many years. So I would go over to my dad's. I felt like I had this split personality, that I'd be in Hackney most of the time in East London. It was like grey and run down and street violence and gangs. And then I'd go to Chelsea, and it was Chelsea and it was all white. People were white, the houses were white.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I'd walk down King's Road with my dad and my friends, and there'd be all the punks and everything. So I feel like I got a really, broad education, like street
yeah,
education. I was put on a plane by myself at 11 years old by my dad to fly across the ocean, the Atlantic, to go to Detroit, where
wow,
my aunt and uncle, his sister, and then my grandmother immigrated. Um, so from a pretty young child, I was traveling on my
yeah,
own. And then, well, I had parents, I had family meeting me at the other end, and my mom, my dad meeting me when I got back. But and then, being with Jen, I got to travel everywhere. And
yeah,
so that was the first time I came to California, even though I'd been in the States when I was 11, was when he invited me to come for the last two Throbbing Gristle gigs in LA and San Francisco.
wow,
And yeah, and then I was hanging out with Don Bowles, who was the drummer of the Germs and then 45 Grave,
yeah,
and all these interesting people.
yeah,
Lord Bessie. Actually didn't meet him when he was in London with his wonderful wife, Philomena Stanley, but they were in London and they were doing Slash magazine, that
mm,
some people, listeners and viewers will know of Slash magazine. Yeah, so I think again, it's like you look back on your life and I think with yourself, you know, if you had that initial classical training in cello, but I think in some ways then you can appreciate, like, people think punk was, maybe people who didn't listen to punk were like, oh, that was just noise.
Mm.
You know, there's a lot of musical, really
That was
musical.
definitely my dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
He used to call it bang and thump music.
Oh, bang and thump music. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, what are you listening to that
Classic.
for? Yeah. But I know, I know. And so it's like, yeah, who was I listening to the other day? Flip, his name's on the tip of my tongue. Musician, he was punk musician, and Sharkil, what's his name? Irish musician, but he's very much focused on activism now.
Mm.
Water, and especially with the River Lee and cleaning up the rivers.
Oh, is
And
it Feargal Sharkey?
yeah,
He was in
yeah,
the Undertones. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. You know, but they were asking him sort of, you know, that's a big transition from, you know, your days in music. And, you know, he was saying, well, not really. You know, it's like I was
Yeah.
interested in what was going on in the world. You know, it's just we can have different focuses in our
Yeah.
lives, and people are multidimensional. So we
Mm.
can't, you know, it's like, let's not put people in a box. You know, just if you, for example, if you listen to punk music, doesn't mean that you're not, that you can't appreciate classical music. You
Yes, it's really interesting. Yeah, so for me at that time, that was exactly the case. I couldn't do. I've in the last couple of years, well, last year, I bought myself another cello. I do.
really
Yeah, it kind of feels like I've got something, just, sort of some unfinished business somewhere,
brilliant.
and I
That is
need
so,
to I need to sort of do it again.
yeah, I love that when things come full circle.
Yeah,
You know, it's like circuitous, you know, like sometimes we just need to, you know, put things away, you know, put things to
yeah.
bed, you know, and it's just we're at different stages. We can be in different stages in our life and then come back to things.
You made it just made me think when you were talking about Feargal Sharkey there, and clearly, the sort of the environment, and particularly water, is a something that's very dear to him, as it should be. And it made me think about, with you when you did your when you went back to do your studying, and you're studying about, sort of social justice, white privilege, and those sort of things that you hold dear, and how that then helps you in your life overall, whether it's your sort of creative life in the work you do, or in living, in being a better person, better understanding of with empathy, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when you unpack white privilege, if you're white,
Mm,
uh, it's, I mean, I can only talk from my own experience, but it's hard, you know, because I, I used to think, oh, I live in, you know, I grew up in Hackney, you know, like we're all poor kids growing up together. We're
mm,
all the same, you know, because we're all poor. But there was this richness that we'd be playing with each other and go and do things. But you know, one of the great things about my mom was she never said, she would say go out and play in the street, but she never said don't play with the black kids or don't play with the Indian kids or whatever.
mm.
So I never had that forced on me. So I did end up having friends from these cultural backgrounds, and it would have been really hard to say don't play or talk to those kids because that's what school was
Yeah,
like.
yeah,
Everyone was classrooms. However, when you really unpack white privilege, I really got to see like, oh, just because of the color of my skin, I automatically get privilege. Like
yeah.
I was in a restaurant here, actually, in California, with my friend who was my best friend in high school.
Mm,
And her parents, so she's second generation West Indian, Caribbean. And the server in the restaurant was being really weird with us.
mm,
And we were visiting this town, and Lorraine said to me, "Oh, I feel like I'm the only Black in the village." And
mm.
she really felt like the server was racist. And it made me sort of stop and go, "Oh," and and I felt this uncomfortableness. But all these things that you take for granted because you're white, because you
Yeah,
don't even know, like, oh, you go into a sweet shop when you're a kid with all your Black friends, and then the newsagent might all be looking at your Black friends like, oh, they're going to steal something.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but you learn a lot. And when I was in school in England, we our history lessons did not cover slavery
No,
or the Middle Passage,
no, absolutely.
or yeah, it was all about kings and queens and this privilege. Like, when oh, when the coronation was happening of King Charles,
Mm,
the people here are like, "Oh, are you watching the coronation?" I was like, "No, I'm not a royalist, but don't stereotype me because
yeah.
I'm English, because I speak the English language and I have white skin." I
Mm,
mean, we can be everyone's stereotyped, whether you're, Black or white or rainbow colored. We're all stereotyped by someone.
mm,
It's the nature of the game. It's
yeah,
how, I think, probably how it's human conditioning. It's how we're socialized. And unfortunately, I think it's then part of how our brain is wired with this early socializing. And
yeah,
that's what we need to, untangle. There's so much um there's so much work that we have to do on the planet, and we need a huge paradigm shift. And I think
yeah,
there's shifts that have happened, but then, like, I think America is the United States is such a great example. On one level, there was, oh, gay marriage is legal, and we're getting all these trans rights. And now on the other hand, it's like abortion is banned,
mm,
and
mm,
and there's all this discrimination against people who are non-binary. and
yeah,
and that's not even with the really ingrained you know discrimination and racism
yeah.
that's all over the world. Yeah. So we've
No,
got
absolutely right.
yeah, we've got huge work to do as human beings. So I mean, I just was listening yesterday that India just sent up, like a rocket space station to do research on the sun.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
thinking, yep. And how many millions, billions of people in India are living in poverty and
mm,
don't have access to clean water,
yeah,
and yet we find money to do these things.
yeah.
So
I,
yeah,
I,
I
do-
went on.
yeah, no, I agree with you. No, yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, this sort of human condition of on the one hand, okay, sort of space exploration, the curiosity comes out that it's sort of interesting. But do you think? I mean, I think, oh my God, there are so many pressing, like damningly pressing issues here that we should be spending our money on. I don't know. Maybe I just view it in a too simply. I don't know, but that to my mind, it's kind of nuts.
I think it's nuts, completely nuts. I mean, yeah, I mean, if Richard Branson and all these billionaires want to spend money in space, fine, but spend an equal amount here on the planet,
Yeah,
like on food programs and clean
yeah,
water. And there's so many ways that we could help the planet. And we what I feel we need to do if we erased poverty, which we can do, there would be such a huge shift for the whole
Yeah.
planet. And there's enough resources to erase poverty. Wasn't it? There was a big push in England a few years ago, the
Yeah.
end poverty,
Yeah.
um, yeah, movement. And I don't have all the facts and the figures, but I mean, we do know that divide between the wealthy and the billionaires, um, and the underprivileged, or what's the politically correct way to say that now? But
Mm.
the divide is getting bigger and
It's
bigger and
bigger,
bigger.
bigger for sure.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see a huge impact from that fallout, and of course from the global warming as
Yeah.
well.
When you mentioned a while ago about that just thinking about the time what came next after sort of psychic TV, and I'm thinking about the things that you learned while in that, let's say, 10-year period, and the things that you were doing. You're doing lots of things. You're meeting many different sorts of people, talking about this sort of diversity of people, and again, their own mindsets, and how you then use the it sounds very sort of technical in a way, but it's not meant to be. But basically what you'd learned, how you then use that sort of post psychic TV.
Psychic TV. Um, I think a lot of it for me is, it's got to be humility.
Mm,
The end of the. Well, I was listening this morning. I have the spiritual center that I go to. It's called the Center for Spiritual Living,
yeah,
and the the talks are really sort of inspirational, but it's more like oh gosh, like life, yeah, inspirational, life affirming. But the talk today was on self-love.
yes,
And
yes,
and we think, oh yeah, I love myself, but he was talking about how do you it's one reason it's hard for us to love ourselves, for many different reasons, but also the narcissism, that we think it's about narcissism, that we go, oh, I love myself. But there is a healthy way that we can say, oh yeah, I do love myself. But I'm not saying that I personally do. I mean, that is a work in progress, I think, for so many of
yeah,
us. But
yeah,
so your question is, there's 10 years in psychic TV, I met a lot of people. And what's been wonderful is, since I started sharing stories and photos and all this, about my time in psychic TV on social media,
yeah,
um, I've got these beautiful stories of people going, oh, you probably don't remember me, but I came to the show in New York and I didn't have a ticket, and I didn't have the money for a ticket. But I just thought, I'm just going to go. I'm going to see if
yeah,
they said, and I appeared at the back door, and I said to this woman, oh, I like your dress. And I started a conversation, and then she was like, oh, I really wanted to see you play, but didn't have a ticket. And I'd be like, oh, come on, come in, through the
come in,
back door.
yeah, yeah,
And so many people had comments like that, like, oh, like, after the show, you were the only person who came to talk to us. We were these shy boys standing in the corner. So I'm not saying that to say, oh, look, I'm such a nice person and I would do this. I feel that one reason I did that was, yeah, all these famous people would come and see us. I remember, like, Perry Farrell was at one of our shows, and I
mm,
suppose Dave Grohl's just mentioned psychic TV in his memoir. I haven't read it, but my cousin messaged me about it.
yeah,
But for me, it was all about the people who came to the shows. Like, I and a lot of people were around my age, early 20s at the time, mid 20s, and I wanted to talk to them. Like, I really like, I've met Perry Farrell a couple of times and we just don't connect. I don't really have anything to say to him, and I don't know if
yeah,
he really has anything to say to me. But I'm all about the man on the street, like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
experience. Why did you come and see psychic TV? You know, like what other bands of music? What do you know, what are you doing in life? Are you going to college? You know, are you working? And I was just having a chat with my best friend who's English but lives here. We met here.
Yeah.
And I was telling her about one day Jen and I were at the West End. And I think we were at a lawyer's office. I can't remember, but we ended up getting in a lift, and Arthur Scargill got in the lift.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was sort of, oh my God,
Amazing.
amazing. And I was sort of, that's when I was more starstruck with like,
Yeah.
but me and my bestie were talking about the miners' strike. And, you know, I feel like I was an activist pretty young, you know, in
Yeah.
my life. Like there were things that piqued my interest, you know, the miners' strike, you know, we were very against, Jen and I and Toby sort of against Thatcherism.
Mm.
Um, and and also, you know, I'd started this campaign to close down the dolphinarium in Brighton and release the
Yeah.
dolphins. So I think, yeah, so all of that experience brought me to a place of, okay, I'm taking a sabbatical. What am I interested in? I want to go back to college, even though it took me 20 something years to do that.
Yeah.
And I did record a solo album. It was released in '95, Sacred Dreams.
Yeah.
But I was very much like, I need a break from the music industry. And
Mm.
part of it was I was so done with the misogyny
Yeah.
in the industry. And it was exhausting. And it was on every level. I mean, now we're hearing more of these stories, you know, like the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
You know, even Lady Gaga, I watched a documentary on her life. And she was very much, I think, involved in the making of the documentary. But she even had this experience of this producer saying, you know, like, if you don't take off your clothes right now, I'm going to burn all the master tapes or this recording.
Yeah.
And she said she would never name this producer, but she was sexually assaulted.
Mm.
Um, and my experience was, yeah, you know, there'd always be those offhand sexual comments, but talking down to you. But, you know, I think one example I gave recently, you know, being in the recording studio, if there wasn't someone to make the tea that was sort of an intern, everyone always looked at me like, oh,
Mm.
go and put the kettle on. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
I'm a woman, you know. So,
Yeah.
so I needed a break from the misogyny of the music business. I just needed a break from all of it, you know,
Mm.
the intensity, you know, and the intensity of being in a relationship with Genesis for 10 years
Yeah.
or 11 years, I think. And yeah, like going back to like, who am I um, without being in this band? And I missed it. You know, there was so many great things from being in the band and traveling and gigs and meeting people. Um, and there really was this period for me where it was like, oh my God, who am I? And I was living in the boonies out in
Yeah.
Northern California. But it's been it's like that, it's like coming back to me, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
who am I? And yeah, who are we when we take off all these masks? And, you know, I mean, ultimately, it's like we're no one.
It's
You know?
interesting. It's saying about those masks and you know what you what you experienced and what a lot of other you know women musicians have experienced. You know that misogyny, the resilience that take the energy that it takes to endure that day after day. You know, eventually it's okay. I need, and it shows the importance of the people that you surround yourselves with. And of course, it's very hard when you're in that industry because that's what it is. And your physical environment,
Yeah.
changing those to make those work for you. what's right in your stage of life.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's true. I mean, I think it was probably why I went from really just being surrounded by men, and
Mm,
there was, obviously some good men, but it was
yeah,
like, wow, this is just male and
yeah,
so much male energy. And I kind of flipped that coin and I went into, going to all these women's circles, and then I started facilitating women's circles and just wanted to basically primarily be around women.
yeah.
And before that, I did go to an all-girls high school, which isn't uncommon in Britain, but
Mm,
I specifically did not want to go to a school with boys. I was like done from primary school. I was like,
yeah,
ah, boys, And yeah, so it's like, how do you strike that healthy balance? And um, yeah, a friend was saying the other day, like, oh, I have hope that there's a new generation of boys and men who are more conscious. And I was like, I do, yeah, I think so too.
yeah,
And I think the misogyny is still there. And I think one of the things that really perpetuates misogyny, one of the things, I mean, that we still live in patriarchal societies, is pornography.
mm,
Like pornography is rife.
yeah,
And I'd like to be like, oh, I'm really open, and yeah, people want to watch people having sex, but it's the same thing. It sort of puts women and men in these roles, but it's like the
yeah.
objectification that,
Objectification, yeah, putting in roles, obviously, kind of perpetuating roles that
yeah,
the majority of the mainstream sort of porn does.
yeah, exactly. The majority of the mainstream pornography does, and
And then you get sort of characters like Andrew Tate as well, who have what seems to me, if what I read is right, a fairly unhealthy following of young males, if that's right.
oh, I'm not familiar with Andrew Tate.
Mm,
Who
yeah,
is that?
he's the I have got his name right. Yeah, the guy who was arrested. He's massive on TikTok and the
Oh,
one
the
that was
guy that,
arrested in Romania for on
oh
charges
yes,
of child
yeah,
trafficking, sort of women sex trafficking,
that.
kind of extortion, all these sort of charges.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I did. Yeah, I did read it. I couldn't remember his name, but I am familiar with that case and that situation. Yeah, I mean, actually, I mean, not changing the subject too much, but it makes me think about the recent sentencing of the demonstrators and protesters on January 6th.
oh
In
yes, yeah, yeah.
Capitol. And there were some women there. I
Mm,
think one woman was I think she was shot by a policeman there and died. Um, but oh my God, is that an example of patriarchy or what? Like
absolutely.
these. I mean, even if they're women, they're sort of really under this. They were under the spell of this. Trump and this patriotic um, patriarchal icon.
Mm, yeah.
We could talk about that. That's a whole other,
That's a whole other,
yeah, like separate
other
list
sort
that
of
we could yeah, go down. Oh my God, yeah, yeah. I mean, the world is crazy. I've actually taken a news break for several months
yeah,
because
it's a
I
good
was,
idea.
yeah, it was really affecting my mental health.
Absolutely. I to completely agree with you.
Yeah, I was listening to BBC Radio 4, and like I like to listen to all the different shows and Women's Hour, whatever, and then the news would come on, and then it was like, all these bombs just went off in Ukraine, and this many children died,
Mm,
and I think I mean, scientifically and with psychiatrists and psychotherapists, they've proved that how this is detrimental to our mental
Yeah.
health. Because part of it is we feel we don't have control. Like if this bomb goes off, then, or this horrible thing happens, what we feel, we don't feel empowered to,
Mm.
how do we change that? And I think that's part of it, is that we have to feel that we can change things. It's
Yeah.
like, and going back to Gandhi, I think that there is an example of how one person, of course he had many other people helping him,
Yeah.
and support, um, but how one person's voice, you can change. I mean, who would have thought that the English, colonial Britain, England, would have withdrawn from India?
Yes. Yeah. It's true.
Um, but so we have to remember that we can change things as individuals. And I think we've got to have that balance of not getting sucked into the news, because there's a lot of news that, I mean, now I've been listening to I took this news break the last week. No, it's not even been a week. I've been listening to the BBC, and they're not even mentioning Ukraine. It's all about the concrete in the school buildings.
Yeah, it's hardly ever on now, I know.
And it's just like that hasn't stopped. So yeah, yeah. So
If
that
we
was, yeah,
if we go back to when we talk the workshop that we did, and sort of unlocking those stories, and what you've been doing in sort of with releasing some, sort of putting out there some of your stories and memories. How has that made you feel, in terms of your own sort of journey, and what else are you working on? What's sort of coming next?
next. Well, it was interesting because yesterday I did an interview, it was a video interview for a YouTube channel too.
Mm,
Um, and great interviewer, um, and Katson, and is the name of the production company. Um, great interview, great questions. And then I realized that afterwards, after I shut down my computer, I was exhausted.
mm,
And partly I'd woken up at like 2 a.m. the night before and I couldn't get back to sleep. I
yeah,
was like, get up at 4 usually to write. So I'm like, okay, I might as well stay awake. But I realized I think it was exhausting talking about my past.
yeah, yeah,
Sort of like, oh, this is great. And there's something about sort of talking about it, going back into
yeah,
these stories, that it's like, whoa. And I think
mm,
it's the PTSD or something again.
yeah,
So what am I working on? I mean, I've been recording again. We started recording before the lockdowns and pandemic, so it
yeah,
got put on hold, so we couldn't get together. Um, so we just started going back into the studio
mm,
and working on songs. I have been writing, because I'm primarily, well, I'm still an interdisciplinary, right, artist. I do all sorts of
yeah,
different things. I do some visual art. Obviously I'm doing some music, and I'm a writer. One day I'd like to get all the writing together that I've written and the new writing, and it would be great to publish a memoir of. I was working on a memoir of my childhood, but people were like, "Oh no, people want to know about when you were in psychic TV." So, a memoir is a slice of your life. It's
yeah,
not usually, from when I'm born until now. So there's obviously a lot of stories in those 10 years of
mm,
my personal experiences, but also hanging with people like Timothy Leary, my
Yeah.
interactions with William Burroughs. I spent more time with Brian Geisen than I did with William. Um, but yeah, so I'm working on those stories. So I like to get up early and write.
Yeah.
Um, had terrible writer's block through the pandemic, um, because as you know, our lives just went from what we knew as normal to the new
Mm,
normal. And,
mm,
I was living on my own. So it was like, what the fuck, and I couldn't even go out. Like I would socialize out of my house and couldn't do that. So that's really primarily that I'm working on music and writing.
yeah.
And then I get my pen and ink out, and I've been sketching and doing some collages this weekend. There was an event last night, an opening night of my archive. So
Mm,
the archive that I have through those years being with Jen and afterwards, but focused on psychic TV and the Temple of Psychic Youth. Um, so my archive was shown in the Yucca Valley, which is like Joshua
well,
Tree.
yeah. Yeah.
And I was meant to go to the event, but was feeling a little under the weather, and it was also a 10-hour drive. And I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm not up to it. But that, there's interest in showing that archive in London and Paris and New York and San Francisco. So there's
Yeah.
very, 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 very early talks to see if we can
To
make that
see you
happen.
do that. Yeah. Wow. I think, I mean, I think, I think, yeah, people always love the memoirs, the what happened, this happened, blah, 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 and all that. You kind of can't get away from that. But I think as well, you have an amazing story, and of what you've learned and how you've used that to get to where you are, and as we talked about, kind of living in the present, how
Yeah.
it's kind of impacting you now, or and benefiting you now, what you've learned, and your mind, how you see the world.
Thank you. Well, I felt that it's I've got, I'm looking back and I feel like I have to look back and go, oh God, there were some really, really challenging times in there,
Mm,
really challenging. So when I look back and I think, oh, there was some things that are very questionable. I
mm,
was very, very young when I met Jen. I mean, I was 18 when we got into a relationship, but I met him when
mm,
I was 15.
mm,
And yeah, sort of how I bring all of that to the table now.
absolutely.
And yeah, and I think for me it's like I, I'm not I'm from nowhere, no way, and a very long way from being, if I ever get there, from being enlightened. But I feel that I'm really more on this sort of spiritual path of,
Absolutely.
yeah, just like, okay, I mean, all this stuff around us. I mean, I love art. I've got a nice collection of art in my house. But the end of the day, it's all of it is, I'm trying to think of the right word, but I mean, I suppose what really it's kind of meaningless, you
Yeah,
know. And
I hear you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's wonderful to have a. I'm so thankful that I've got this lovely, beautiful home, and it's not like I've got this custom, fantastic, custom built home. I'm lucky. I feel grateful that I've got a home,
Yeah.
and I've got, beautiful things around me. But I think I really got it when we've had major fires in Northern California and
Yeah.
very close to my house, like 4 or 5 miles away. And I had to evacuate several times. And evacuating, it was really looking around my house going, what can I not live without? And my daughter was like, Mom, grab the pets, grab grab the animals,
Yeah.
like if you grab your passport, grab your passport. And I really literally looked around and went, what can I not live without? And it was like okay, my kids are safe. I'll grab my pets. And now I have a bag ready to go that has my passport and birth certificates and stuff. And I
Yeah.
have my teddy bear from when I was a baby that my dad gave me, but you realize, that it's like being the aesthetics, sort of like
Yeah.
but the true yogis who, live in the caves um, but at the end of the day, what do you really need? I mean, yes, it's wonderful to have a roof over your head and food and clean water. But, it's like someone said to me once, like, when you die, are people going to think, oh, they had this much money and they left this much money, or they built this legacy? Or are they going to say, how well did they love
Yeah.
and how were they loved? So I think we get to the important core issues are, like love, love and kindness and compassion. And it might sound cliche and corny, but it's like if you can have one act of kindness a day, whether
Yeah.
that's saying to someone, a stranger, like, oh, I love your dress, or someone falls over. That's when you see the humanity of people. When we go, oh, some people are like, oh, the world's really fucked up. But if someone falls over outside the market, the supermarket, the grocery store, I would say that people don't turn a blind eye. You'll get everyone run over, especially if the person's elderly. But anyone, they'll run over and they'll try and help, and
Yeah.
they'll and I've heard beautiful stories and I've witnessed beautiful stories. So that that gives me faith in humanity, that I actually believe that 99.9% of humans are good.
Yeah.
And you get these people who there is no other word for them, who are evil,
Yeah.
like Hitler.
Yeah.
And then you get people who are brainwashed to follow them, like the Germans. But people have to remember not every German wanted to, there was like 14 assassination attempts, I think, on
Yeah.
Hitler's life.
Yeah.
That most people are good. And we have to remember that. And, so I think rounding up this conversation, I mean, if I'm happy to keep talking, that we have to, I personally can speak to myself. I have to see the positive in people and the positive in life. Like when I'm having a bad day, and I have bad days, and I've been having an existential crisis recently for the first time in my life. Like I'm doing the dishes and I'm like, fuck, I'm washing the dishes. Fuck, I've got to mop the kitchen floor again. It's filthy. And then I'm like, is that my fucking life? Mopping and washing and mopping and washing. And then I was having the existential crisis of like, what is my life about?
Yeah.
But maybe the truth is the life, it's not about what's my life about, like, oh, am I gonna create this amazing thing that I'm gonna become famous for or whatever. But what about if your life is just about being the kindest human being that you can possibly be? And also you're human, so you're gonna lose your temper.
Yeah.
I get road rage, someone cuts me off. I go from I come out of my yoga class and I'm like, oh, I just did my yoga class and my teacher's such a great person. And then someone cuts me off and I'm like, you fucking C-U-N-K. And then I'm like, oh my God, where did that? And I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm human, you
Oh
know,
my.
I'm human. So we're perfect. We have to remember that we're perfect in all our imperfections. And that's what makes us human, is that we
Yeah.
will always be imperfect, perfect humans. Yeah. And
Laura,
acknowledge.
sorry, I was just going to say that's a perfect place to stop. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a really best way to look at life.
Yeah, yeah, that we're imperfect, and to have
And to
and
accept that, you know,
and to
accept and
accept,
understand that, you know.
exactly, and have empathy for ourselves and empathy for others. It's
Yeah.
very hard to have empathy, I think, for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I fucked up, and that's the thing when you were saying looking back on your lives, like we'll look back if we become conscious human beings. We're like, oh God, I really fucked up. Like I was
Mm.
really mean to that person when I was 20, or I stopped talking to that boyfriend or that girlfriend and I ghosted them, and like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible
Yeah.
person. So you gotta have the humanity and the forgiveness for yourself
Yeah.
and for others. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, remembering that we're all imperfect, and and try and forgive. Like we gotta forgive.
Gotta forgive.
Gotta forgive. Doesn't mean you have to forget what someone's being an asshole, but you can forgive. Because you do it for yourself. Well, it's really such a pleasure
That's
to
brilliant.
talk with you. I love it. Yeah, it's been a
Totally.
great.
That's great, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you.
Been
Thanks for
really, really great.
yeah, thanks for a great conversation. And oh my gosh, it's getting late there, and you've been traveling from Spain, so let you get off and have your dinner and wind down. And I'm gonna have my lunch, which
Don't
will
blame
probably
you. Don't blame you. I think we
yeah,
both earned it.
yeah. My lunch will probably be ginger nut biscuits and some rich tea. My local supermarket has an English section, and I'm like, yes, more biscuits.
This is what the creature comfort's about.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a brilliant conversation. Thank you
It
so much.
has. It has. No, thanks so much. It's really good to see you again.
Yeah, brilliant to see you. Let's be in touch soon.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.